Hello, welcome to Framework. I am Al Schwartz. With me, as always, is John Bernard.
Hello.
And a special guest today to help us continue our winding path through the Nolan-oscopy is Mr. Matt Rose. Say hi, Matt.
Hey, everybody.
And Matt, you're here to help us talk about Inception. You want to start out by explain to me, what is Inception?
Inception is the implanting of memory.
Is this an action movie?
Yeah, well, it's a James Bond movie a la Christopher Nolan, is the way I think it, the way I really look at it.
Really? But neither of us mentioned dreams, this is ostensibly a movie about dreams, right?
Yes. I mean, it is totally about dreams, but I think it's about dreams via the James Bond framework in many respects.
It definitely has some James Bond imagery and scene setups and kind of figures that remind you of James Bond. I mean, he's on record as saying, Nolan is, that he really likes Bond and would like to do a Bond movie at some time. I don't know how that would work, really. I mean, I guess I could kind of imagine some weird version of Daniel Craig Bond doing Nolan. But he's kind of reached that point where he's a director that is so defined and so, so used to being in control, I guess would be the other part of it, that Eon and the Bond team probably wouldn't want to touch him. Which, I always think that's a bit of a shame, but because I want to see the Spielberg Bond or the Tarantino Bond movies, but they don't do that. But they always have to do their version of it as a result. And Nolan, I guess this is that.
He's a little like Tarantino. I mean, they have opposite sensibilities, but in that they're so established now in their like realm that it's hard to imagine them stepping out of it and doing like a franchise thing.
Yeah, which is probably for the best, honestly. You don't want to. You don't want them stuck doing Star Trek movies or whatever. As cool as it sounds on paper.
Nolan might be able to do a good Star Trek movie. I think.
I'm sure he would. I mean, he did a good Batman
very
movie.
Grounded.
Yeah, like he can do these things clearly, and it's kind of plays to his strengths in a lot of ways. This, on the other hand, is like him with no holds on. Like this is, you just made The Dark Knight. Make whatever you want, absolutely anything, and we will bankroll it.
Pretty much. And to that point, I think if Nolan were to do a Star Trek type movie, something that would be really in his range would be something like a mirror universe type one, something where he could really play around with cause and effect between the two universes, because that seems to be his strength, is kind of finding a gimmick and applying it to a movie.
Yeah, and I guess he's already like played around with time dilation in both this and Interstellar.
Yeah, that one's in space. So,
yeah,
I would think it would look like Interstellar would be his Star Trek. Be similar to
That's true. Yeah. It would be the most grounded, like hard sci-fi that Star Trek had been on probably a big screen on Incarnation, if you got him to actually do that. But we're talking about everything but Inception here.
Yeah.
But essentially, I don't think I think of Inception as an action movie or Bond movie. It's sort of first and foremost, I mean, it's sort of a heist movie. But even more than a movie about dreams, I think of it's a movie about filmmaking. I sort of think of it in the category of meta, movies about movies.
I mean, that got into my head. This was, when this came out, it was very short after, people started to be like, oh, it's a filmmaking metaphor. And I mean, now I can't even imagine not thinking that about this movie. Like it incepted me, like I now kind of have that association no matter what, and I can't turn it off because it seems so obvious and direct now that like, oh, okay, clearly everyone has this role to play in the creation of this thing. This is the guy who is, this is the writer, this is the actor, there's the studio, all that stuff. As a result, I almost have lost track of where I was initially when I saw this, when that didn't occur to me.
Yeah, I don't know if I came out of it thinking like it's a direct allegory for filmmaking, but it was impossible to miss that it's about storytelling.
Yeah,
it's about smuggling themes into a populist work of fiction, and I don't think it was possible to really miss that. It's weirdly like one of the most accessible movies about movie making or about storytelling.
Well, in the sense that it's not at all about filmmaking literally. Like there's no there's no backstage kind of drama. There's no like my director of photography is crazy. Like you would normally see in things like this, or not like this. Normally see in a film about filmmaking. This is really beating its own path, and that's awesome. like that it is able to be such a clear metaphor without doing anything with filmmaking itself. Literally, that's pretty impressive just on its own.
I kind of admire the storytelling that goes into, especially the third act of the film, when you essentially have three or four stories going on at the same time. How you're having to edit between all four of them and have it not throw the audience off. You always understand exactly where everything is going. And, in some instances, especially with the van going off the bridge, that's going on in slow motion. And then it carries over to Joseph Gordon Levitt's story, where he's obviously, the fact that the van is floating in the air is affecting his reality or his version of the dream, and transposing further on into the mountaintop sequence. It just, from a learning standpoint, I learned a lot watching that, especially this last time around when I watched it very recently.
It jumped at me last time around, though. I was wondering, like, why. So we understand that Joseph Gordon-Levitt, in his level, loses gravity because they're falling in the level above him. So then, why doesn't that not go down another level? Because they're floating at his level. So how come? Yeah,
because it's so much more dilated time, and it's more disparate. You're like even farther back into the back of John Malkovich's head at that point. You're it's looking through a pinhole up to the one above the one that you're already from. Yeah, I mean, look, there's a little bit of cheating maybe, and I do get the sense that the second, third, and fourth dream, the time is kind of happening concurrently rather than at a massive dilation. But I don't know if you could even pull that off, honestly. Like,
well, there's less cheating than you would think, and
yes.
it's that's why it's so weird to think about this as a movie about dreams. It is. There's no whimsy to it whatsoever for a movie that takes place almost entirely, or arguably entirely, in dreams.
Yes, I kind of go back and forth on that. I think I love it because I do feel this is how Nolan dreams. Like, a lot of rain, and the most fantastical thing is you'll be like, well, you'll see a vehicle that is in a place that vehicle normally wouldn't be. Like, oh, there's a train on the street. Isn't that crazy and dreamlike? You're not kidding.
Yeah.
There's no anthropomorphic animals or cartoons or anything that show up in like my dreams.
Yeah, they established early on that you can sort of like do the Doctor Strange type of like bending of reality and moving the setting around, but then they don't really ever do that in the actual heist itself.
Yeah.
Well, they make a point that doing that would alert the dreamer, theoretically, that they are in a dream, and the whole point of the heist is keeping it as static and as normal as possible, so as not to alert and otherwise alarm the dreamer.
But I mean, they wrote that. They decided like that is something, that's a rule we're going to create. So we will not be doing much city folding in this. I mean, it's kind of like they create this amazing visual thing. They sell the movie on that. And then they kind of like, but we're not actually going to do that, just so we could. And of course, Doctor Strange then takes that baton and says, oh, we'll just make that the movie then. And I think that the new one looks like it's even more of that. So, obviously it drove immense inspiration from this film, just in that visual alone. And, but yeah, this movie is kind of like it does that. And then it's just like, yeah, we don't even need that old thing. That's not what we're really about here.
Yeah, here's the potential of what you could do, but that's going way over the top. Again, we don't want to alert the dreamer that they're in a dream state. We'll keep it as normal as possible. And just curious, do you remember your dreams when you wake up in the morning? Do you ever really remember your dreams? And if so, how vividly do you remember them?
They fade so fast. I have them for like 5-10 minutes, and then they're mostly gone. And what I have is what I initially kind of defined it as in those first 5 minutes, which is a version of it. So no, nowhere near it with this clarity. I understand other people do though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm envious of them. I very rarely do I remember my dreams with any sort of clarity. And as you say, when you do remember them, the details are very ephemeral. They dissipate very, very quickly. So I'm very envious of those that can remember them. But do you think the movie relies upon the dreamer remembering their dreams with clarity once they wake up? Do you think that matters?
No, I think it specifically does not, because he would remember, like he would know that he had talked to DiCaprio in that bar, Cillian Murphy would, or just the specific things that he came to a decision about it would be a 1-to-1 thing. And I think it's the nature of the incepted idea is that yeah, well, I don't know, it's tough though, because I think clearly Cillian Murphy as the subject does not remember the specifics, but the guys who are actively going into dreams, they do because they have to, it's their job. So I don't know that I have a strong answer for that, actually, now that I think about it. I mean, I do think this movie does not treat dreams, it's not really interested in dreams for being a movie about dreams. The dreams are a metaphor for films or stories, the way that Nolan is perceiving being a storyteller. That's kind of the central idea, or at least, I don't know. This is how I read it now, because I got that idea in my head and I can't read it any other way. So I don't think he's too interested in the mechanics of dreams, just in the same way he's not interested in the sci-fi of how they can do this. That is all table setting for what he's really interested in, which is the nature of storytelling.
Well, I think you're entirely right there. That it is all about just storytelling, and that's the strongest aspect to this. I think it's got a really good handle on how themes work and the power of storytelling, which is something that I think tends to befuddle a lot of movie people, both like movie makers and movie fans, is that we can kind of get wrapped up in like either movies are the most important, most powerful form of expression in the world, or they mean nothing and do nothing and change nobody's mind about anything. And I think it's sort of both. And what Inception seems to understand, its idea, the central concept of Inception being that you have to present this idea to the audience in a way that makes them feel like it was their idea. And I think that hits on exactly how storytelling is influential, which is that you can't just tell people what to think and have them think that. That's the didactic, preachy movies don't actually change anybody's mind. The more that a movie is about how racism is bad, the less effective it is at actually getting through to anybody with racist tendencies, which is everybody. But what I think the way that movies are very powerful is that over time, they present racists as villains consistently enough that people absorb the idea that racism is bad and it is a villainous trait. And that is incredibly influential in the culture.
Yeah. Or creating empathy for the victims of racism, or
Yes.
or just showing ideas like privilege play out in a way that's not just a word or a description or an explanation, but as a relatable story aspect. And yes, I think that is exactly what this is on point with in Inception, which is kind of a strange irony because the movie is so much about explaining how things work, and so much about like, okay, so this is what you have to understand for this, and that's the vast majority of the dialogue. 70-80% of the dialogue is explaining how things work, but it's not the things that it's actually about.
Yeah, so much exposition, and yet it's pretty clear. Like it's remarkable. This to me feels like the spiritual sequel to Memento, in that my reaction to it is very similar. I am blown away that this functions, and it's a triumph that it works at all. I also just cannot muster any actual love in my heart for these things. Like I did not watch it. I was very impressed by Inception in 2010. Thought it was an incredible piece of work, and never had a desire to revisit it again until we did this. And now I can say pretty confidently, I'm never going to sit down and watch Inception again the rest of my life. But I will reference it like once a month for the rest of my life.
There's one thing about this film, you mentioned about how everything is explained, and the film is just, one constant exposition dump, especially in the first act, with Elliot Page as the audience proxy. But what I find amazing is how much, not just how much information is conveyed, but how Nolan doesn't emphasize what areas are important. There might be one line that isn't given much emphasis, but if you don't catch it or if you're not paying attention to it, uh, um, you'll be lost in certain elements later on. It's just a tremendous amount of information to absorb, and you need to absorb it all. This is not a movie you can be folding the laundry to at all. You need to be
Right.
dialed in, intense, watching it to the exclusion of all else with no distractions, or you will be lost.
Yeah, that is like, I mean, I feel like there is stuff in this movie that I still don't 100% get. I mean, I couldn't tell you exactly what those things are. I think I got the general sense of everything, but that's the point. I feel like I have the general sense of everything. Like, it does a pretty good job of letting you know enough. And this is something that Nolan comes into, get criticism about for the rest of his career, really going forward, is that there's stuff that is not important that the audience knows, in his opinion. And a lot of that comes out in the sound mix, and how things are explained. We get to Tenet, we'll really be talking about that. But there is some sort of indifference as to whether everyone gets everything. And usually I don't like that, but I think in Inception's case, it's sort of proof positive of that working. Like, I feel like I have the broad strokes of what's going on at all times, even as I am kind of like holding on to my chair to get every piece of information. This is introducing new plot devices and plot points an hour and a half in. We don't even hear about limbo until like an hour and 20 minutes into this film. The major stakes of the movie.
Well, you said that there's still some stuff you don't get about it, and that's the big one for me. Is that I realized, like, rewatching it, I thought I when I went back to rewatch it, I thought I kind of knew how everything worked, but I realized this time, like, I don't know any idea how limbo works. Is it a collective unconscious? Is it like, does each person have their own limbo? And so how did all these people get into one of them? And I mean, I realize I don't care that much.
Well, they're all in Fisher's limbo in this film,
but it's made up like like the one that Leonardo DiCaprio made with his wife, right?
I guess that's just how limbo works.
Yeah, right. And that is a question I have: is if this is Leonardo DiCaprio's, if this is Cobb's limbo, why is Saito stuck in his limbo? And you just kind of have to go, well, because movie, and move on in some respects,
right? Or because it's all a dream, or
yeah.
Why is Saito an old man, by the way? He's in limbo less than anyone else. Is it just because he's untrained at it? Well, like all that stuff, I'm kind of like, but it actually doesn't matter. I kind of get the idea. I get the point of this. So I don't need to know the exact mechanics of it. And I think Nolan agrees with that philosophy.
I think Saito's an old man because he's been trapped down there theoretically for, because of the time dilation. Yeah, for decades. That was my understanding on that. Well, in his mind, he has.
Maybe, but he went there after DiCaprio and Ariadne, and Fisher. They've all been in limbo longer than he has at that point.
Wait, is that true? But then,
because he's
Ariadne and Fisher left earlier, though, right? Because they fall off the building earlier, and he stays there longer.
I suppose that's true. Yes. So we actually don't know how long DiCaprio is looking for Saito in limbo, which I guess could theoretically be 30 years. Wow.
But why does he wash up unconscious at the beginning?
I do not know.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter, though. I think the point is it doesn't matter. Like, a lot of the time, the point in Inception is it doesn't matter. That's the ending.
But I don't like that as an answer.
It's a bad answer. I agree.
Something needs to matter. And you're right. One of the strange things about this movie is, you're right, it doesn't really establish its stakes until very deep into the movie. And it's this weird esoteric stakes. Like, we've established that getting killed in a dream just wakes you up. So that's not really a problem. And they have to make up a reason why getting killed in the dream now has consequences. You need that sort of, it's nice and clean in the Matrix, where you die in the Matrix, you die in real life. And they have to come up with a version of that here. But it's got to fit within this nesting doll of everything else going on. And, it all technically works. That's the thing about this movie. Everything works technically. It's all there on paper, and including like how they talk about the emotional stakes, in the allegorical terms. Like, we have to, in order for Inception to work, we have to tie it to an emotion to sort of disguise the source of the idea. And in this movie, I can see how, like, okay, he's got the relationship with his dead wife that DiCaprio has to get over. And I'm like, that is the emotional stakes. And I feel like the Futurama when they're watching the Beastie Boys and going, they're busting mad rhymes with an 80% success rate. I believe that technically qualifies as ill. I'm like, yes, everything in this movie technically qualifies as ill. I just can't I can't muster any real emotion around the relationship with Marion Cotillard because it's like, okay,
Well, we only really see her as her own character briefly in a flashback where she kills herself. The rest is
right.
this version of her that exists in
Projection.
Cobb's brain that he some has some control of, but not really. So
Even
yeah,
that is a version he has recreated in the dream space, that so
uh-huh.
could be tilted in some way.
Here's the bitch of this though. I think that's the best character in the movie. I think
Maybe. I mean,
Mal is
but
my favorite character in this film.
I'm just saying, like, I can see, I say, okay, we need an emotional grounding for this movie, and I agree with that. And his relationship with his wife, okay, that's a relatable. He's part of a married couple, and like I'm one of those. I get that. I can do that. I can invest in that. But it's like, okay, but also this married couple spent decades in unconstructed dream space, living together without their kids. And I'm like, okay, the tether's coming kind of loose here, and then they came back to reality and committed suicide, and now she's haunting him through other people's dreams, and like, damn it, now I've lost the connection to our planet Earth. This is theoretically a relationship that I could understand, but I cannot find an emotional tether to this.
Well, bear in mind, he did purposely sabotage her perception of reality.
Right.
Yeah, I love that.
He did it. I
Love
mean,
that.
so I mean that guilt of what it is that he did there, which eventually did lead to her questioning the reality and killing herself, is, I mean, that permeates his entire character. So and is the drive.
And that
That
technically
is
qualifies as
right.
ill.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
Well,
But I mean that level of guilt that he feels on it, I mean, is the emotional drive, I think, for the latter half of the movie. Once you understand, once again that's explained to Ariadne and therefore the audience, then you have something to latch on to help comprehend what's going on with Marion Cotillard's character in terms of why it is that she keeps messing with things in kind of, it's Cobb self-sabotaging everything that he wants to do.
yeah, it functions on a screenplay level. Like I'm looking at it going, yes, okay, you connect all these dots in a way where it technically functions. It's just gaslighting your wife into killing herself because she doesn't believe in a baseline of reality anymore is not a relatable emotional touchstone, even though it is technically an emotional touchstone.
well, it is a big sci-fi premise narrative thing. I mean,
Right.
I would say yes. This does kind of feel less immediate and less directly related to like the experience of Inception than the storytelling dream stuff. The telling a narrative to an audience and having them react in a certain way that you have to craft. That's the stuff that feels immediately relatable. This the Mal plot line is high sci-fi stuff, high just nonsense in a sense, but also it's kind of a hook to hang a narrative on. And I mean, on paper, I feel like Dom Cobb is a really interesting character with a lot of stuff going on. In practice, I don't really feel that. In fact, I think that ultimately, when you get right down to it, the reason that I find this movie hard to connect with and why I don't quite think it's the masterpiece that I did in 2010 is because the characters, I just do not connect to these guys as characters. I don't have a lot of empathy for them. They're interesting on paper. The actors are all wonderful. They're all really, really charming actors who all look incredibly good in this movie. And, they photograph very well. But the characters, sketches, they are representational characters. And I don't know. I feel like this is something that he's kind of been getting into, Nolan. And I think it's something that kind of starts to be a bigger part for him, that the characters end up being a bit of a struggle because they're so deeply representational. And, when those characters are representational in the way that Batman and the Joker are, that's one thing. We have sort of a cultural context for that. We can apply whatever feelings we have about those characters onto what Nolan's saying about them. Here, I'm just not going to connect with, I don't know, Dom Cobb or Ariadne or Sato or Eames, no matter how good the
Yeah.
performances are, because, most of their dialogue is, this is how this works.
It is strange that
Well,
for as much, focus of like as Dom Cobb, the character, gets to be like the emotional core of the movie and how everything revolves around his emotional catharsis, I do find, for whatever reason, I empathize so much more with just Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, who is written as the cold fish, like
Just a guy. Yeah.
just yeah. uh, There's nothing
he's
except
he's
that
the
I don't know.
second in command. Yeah, he's the
Yeah,
Brad
but he has.
Pitt to George Clooney.
The producer, if you will.
I think that's
Yeah.
that's Danny Ocean and Rusty, whatever, is it's a more equal relationship. I feel like he's not, or at least they alternate in movies who's cleaning up after whose like personal messes. But I feel a little bit more for Levitt in this, because just that he has to deal with all this bullshit that's coming from DiCaprio and his problems, and it's not his doing. He just has to deal with it. Whereas the DiCaprio stuff, like I said, it's all there. There's kids involved that should be very compelling. It just all feels very esoteric. It's all wrapped up in that sci-fi stuff, and it's important. I think it's a good thing that the death of his wife sort of establishes the dark side to Inception. That like this, for as much as it's just about how difficult it is to implant an idea in somebody else's head, it allows the movie to acknowledge that there's something dangerous about that too.
As there should be. It sounds really dangerous. The whole thing sounds like there should be some serious consequences to this, and the movie eventually gets to him for sure, mostly through Mel. Yeah.
And the other thing that the movie doesn't really grapple with, I don't think, is how the whole idea of Inception, everything they're doing, this is such a monstrous violation.
Yeah, these are
this
bad
is like
guys.
worse than sexual assault.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're the main characters. They're bad guys. I mean, they're pulling a heist, but it's a very personal heist at a very personal level. You're messing with somebody's head.
For purposes of corporate espionage too.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
Yeah. They couch it as like, oh, well, the upshot's just that they're going to break up Exxon or whatever, and we can get behind that, right? That's not so bad. And I'm like, nah, Fisher might end up being happier. You get some closure with the relationship with his father, I guess.
Incidental, because it helps them. That's why
right.
Yeah. But that's part of the metaphor. That's part of the storytelling metaphor too, though. It really is like, well, it's gonna work better for our purposes if we make them happy along the way. That's
I thought that was an interesting point in the allegory. It's talking about how making people feel good is actually more effective than making them feel bad, or at least more, if you want them to take away the idea that you're trying to impart to them. Yeah. Interesting, because Nolan's films are not like feel good movies. None of them really.
But the biggest hits were about Batman.
Yeah, but the biggest hit of those movies is a really feel bad Batman movie.
True.
Do you think the film would have benefited if the side characters, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Tom Hardy, and so forth, had been drawn out a little bit more beyond being essentially just heist archetypes?
I don't know. This is such a singular film that I almost kind of like that everyone is an archetype. I almost kind of think that's one of the strengths, while at the same time one of the weaknesses. And I don't think this movie needs to be longer. I don't.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
True.
Yes, I think there is. I could make the argument that yes, having the supporting characters be more fleshed out would give me more of the like emotional toehold I'm looking for in this movie, and there's a better version of that. However, this movie is already as long as I want it to be, and I don't know what. There's not really a piece of this Jenga tower you can take out safely.
That's true. I do like that.
Real.
It's not touched on very heavily, but I do love that there's that unspoken friction and little jibes back and forth between Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Tom Hardy. I'd like to know what sparked that, in the past. But it you get a little touches of humor here and there with their relationship that I enjoyed.
They're so good in this. Like, that's the thing. Like, the actors are so good that they pull it off, especially in the moment of watching it. I think Tom Hardy kind of this was a huge part of him becoming a big star. I think. This is the most personality he got to show up to this point, and he's really fun in this. for a role that has like no jokes written in. Like he just knows how to kind of be electric on screen, and just in the way he moves and the way he interacts with people, especially Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who's also kind of like at a career high point right around now. So that all works and helps, and I do feel, you know, kind of patches over some of the rough spots in the characters on paper. You know, Saito is another one. Like, just have Ken Watanabe bring gravitas to this. Like, this is a character that could be the villain of the thing, but no, you really care about him at the end. You know, you are with Dom. You want him to go get him out of limbo. You know, just having a strong cast really helps. But again, I don't know that I need them to have more personality, but at the same time, I want them to. I think it's a problem with the films. Tough one.
I mean, there's never going to be a time when I'm going to say like, no, more personality for the supporting cast would be a bad thing for this movie. Like, that's just always, there's not a lot of room. You just have to kind of squeeze it into the edges of these 97 straight exposition scenes, you know?
Well, does that maybe suggest that this film is just too ornate of an object to exist, or to be perfect, to really succeed 100%? Because there's just, what they came up with is just too goddamn big and too complicated to fit within a movie. That maybe could be a thing. Well, you know, like trying to put all of the, you know, wrong genre here. If you try to make Lord of the Rings one film, you know, you're just going to end up with something where you have to explain everything in every line of dialogue, and you know, you're just going to fit it all in there by force. God damn it! And
you squeeze all the character out of the frame because every line has to be purely functional on a plot level.
Or maybe like the entire Dune 7-book saga. You know, that's sci-fi. Right. You try to do it all in one, and it's just too goddamn much. I mean, I'm not saying I want an Inception franchise. I'm just saying maybe the concept and all the ways that it is being explored here is just a little too complicated to be a perfect thing.
I think the movie would benefit from maybe another 15 minutes to let certain things breathe, because when it's just exposition in that first act with Ariadne, I think it becomes kind of overwhelming.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting to talk about this in terms of Act X, because this is a strange movie if you look at it in a 3-act structure sense, because there are two different ways to do that. Like, either this has a really, really long first act, and then the second act is like most of the dream heist stuff. It doesn't start until you go into the dream heist, and the third act is basically like once they are dropping down to limbo only. That'd be one way of looking at it, in which case it's got a really, really long first act and you know, decently long second act and a pretty short third one. Or alternatively, it basically has a regular size first act, a short second act, and then like an hour and a half third act, if you consider the whole heist to be the third act.
It doesn't fit easy. I think it's just it's more than 3 acts, I think, is all it can be. You know, I think you got to break the dream into 3 acts on its own, or something like that. You know, it's just not tidy in that way. You know, obviously, because this is a weird movie structurally.
Right, because you have plot revelations that happen in the middle of the different heists that are going on in the dream sequence, in the whole heist that in general. So, I mean, you have transitional moments in there. It is kind of hard to break it down in terms of a traditional 3-act structure.
It is almost every time they add a dream level, they go down one more. It's starting a new act is sort of how it works, I guess.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, I don't know, like the snow base in then another big James Bond sequence. Like, is that an act unto itself? It's one of my least favorite sequences, actually. It's just like I guess we have to have an action scene here, kind of, because that's how the dream functions, and always very unclear what's even going on in that level of the dream. And
and the action sequences are hobbled a bit by the antagonists being these faceless non-entities that, you know, don't really I mean, outside of Marion Cotillard, they don't have any identity of their own, like expressly.
Subconscious mind fighting back. Yeah.
And, you know, I guess there is the thing, if they kill you, I guess it drops you down to limbo, which is whatever. I mean, they say it's bad, but it's also like, you're not dead down there. I don't know. It's just, you have to think harder about what the stakes are than when it's as simple as you get shot, you die. There's something to be said for that level of simplicity.
Well, there's nothing simple about this one. I mean, it's everything about
Certainly.
this is complications, and metaphor. And this is actually talking about this, even though that they're saying something else. They mean this. That's the whole thing. And the only way to enjoy that is to be on its wavelength. And I think if you are on its wavelength, it is a singular experience. Like if you are willing to meet this film halfway, you are going to have a hell of a ride. It's just going to be, it's going to be a hard one to kind of wrap your head around literally, I think, which I
Yeah.
think is fitting for a dream movie about storytelling. But it does make this a less perfect object, I guess.
Well, it's weird to talk about in terms of perfection, because there's one way of interpreting that where it is perfect in that it is sort of flawless, like the clockwork here.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it functions in a way that it should not, or it should be very difficult to function on all these levels at once. And,
Yeah, it's
in a
a
way that
remarkable
people get it.
achievement in that way. Like that he makes this as clear as he does and as entertaining as he does is amazing. Very, very few people could do this.
Yeah, but I guess is there a distinction to be made between perfection and flawlessness? I guess, or like, because the other thing, like this, I think this movie does very well is that it enmeshes plot and theme so much. Like, we talk about how every line has to be so functional for the plot, but except that some of that is just establishing themes, but because of what this plot is, it's about exploring themes and implanting them in the audience's mind. How that functions is a plot function as well, and that, again, on paper, I would say that's a mark of a good screenplay that sort of like mixes the plot and the themes don't separate out from each other cleanly, like they're expressing each other. And this definitely does that. It's just that the emotional connection is theoretical for me. It's there on the page and not so much in my gut.
Yeah, it's not very much a gut movie. That's for sure.
Well, it's all in your head. I mean,
it's all very head oriented, and it's just so unique too, though, in that, like, it feels wrong to be complaining about the things that are kind of amazing and unique about this. Like I feel like I'm coming off negative here. I really like this movie. It's just a hard one to love. That's what it really comes down to, because there are very few movies that function this way as a specific, like, thematically focused esoteric art film that is inside the body of this gigantic action blockbuster set piece, but is also kind of about gigantic action blockbuster set pieces and what an artist can achieve within them. Like, that's outrageous. No one does that, like no one gets allowed to do that. You have to make The Dark Knight to get that money and spend it on this. Like, I mean, it has this obvious big budget hook, dream heist, okay, got it, clear, cool, we can do that. And then it's actually about all this other shit, all this other, like, what is it to be an artist? How do you achieve that? What is the actual process of creating art that matters to people? And that's also, again, what's so cool about it. You talk about these Bond sequences. I love that the dreams all kind of have their own genre. They're all sort of tropes and familiar, like, they're going to torture us unless you remember the code to that safe. It's all these kind of premises that they get into, and that's where the change comes from, is just in these familiar ideas getting shown to them over again. It's in a personal way because it's a dream. That's so cool. So, I don't want to complain about this, even as I am at arm's length from the characters.
Yeah. It's a film I admire more than I think enjoy. It's a movie. When I watched it recently, I was watching it and I was just admiring the construction of it, as far as, especially when you get into the heist, how it is that you depict each dream in a singular fashion, and then have them interact with each other, and then how you're going to edit them all together so that the audience, as long as you're following along with the movie at that point, is able to follow exactly where everything is in there, and you have the moments that sync everything up. And I'm curious, for Nolan, what was the driving idea on this? Was it the idea of dreaming within a dream and time slowing down, and then he built the movie based upon this premise, or what? Do you happen to know if what he's ever said was like the impetus behind this idea for the movie?
I looked into a little what he said about it. There's not as much as you'd think, and then there's also just a lot of fan reaction stuff and people's takes on it and things like that. What I found is very contradictory. Honestly, what people want to talk about is the end. Like that's kind of the large part of the analysis that goes into this is the question of whether it's all a dream or not. Like seems to be something that's taken up people's attention and interest, and it's one of the least interesting things to me. I mean, I think the whole point is at the end is like it kind of doesn't matter. He chose reality, and this is where he lives, and but as to what Nolan has said about this, I don't know. I'm racking my mind for something that is pertinent to this. He'll talk about
Right.
individual scenes. He'll talk about the ending means to him, stuff like that. Whatever people ask him, but I don't know. Is there a commentary track? I should check that out. This would be an interesting one to hear that on, unless it is, unless it's just overly technical about like what it was like to shoot that day. I want to hear the themes explained by Nolan, actually.
I mean, it has to be overly technical. I mean,
Yeah,
it's any Nolan commentary has got to be that, and especially with this one, where it's the technical aspects of it or everything. I mean, the plot is all about ironing out the technical aspects
Right.
of all this stuff.
Well said.
But I always think like I don't need to hear what Nolan says about it because it seems sort of self-evident to me from his larger body of work that the time dilation stuff and working on different like layers of chronology and different time frames is this preoccupation of him. That seems to like something he returns to. Like, he
It's
made
a plot point here.
a World War II movie that is all about like that nesting structure. And there's nothing about that story that, cried out for that. That seems to be what interests him in some way. Like he's interested in how editing is a way to like a form of narrative time travel.
And you can also tell how this film is Nolan without any rails because the time differences, the temporal lines moving at different speeds isn't just editing in this case. It is a plot point. It is specifically what the characters are working with. Like, okay, so we have to be aware that there's multiple timelines going on at once here, and they're moving different speeds, and that is going to be the main focus of how we conduct ourselves. There's going to be one person to operate the kick here, and then we got to leave somebody else. So in this place, it's a movie about the temporal lines as a narrative part of it.
Entirely, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it becomes this weird thing of where it's a movie that's supposedly about dreams, but it's so schematic of how everything is so technical. Like I said, there's no whimsy to it whatsoever.
It's the opposite of how dreams work. Yes.
Yeah. The rules are so strict here. And again, like it's this type of thing where we can cite this like as a negative, but I'm not sure that there is a better version of this movie that has more whimsy to it. Really. I think maybe
Dreamscape
things are,
it's not better though. It's it's something, but it's certainly less singular and less remarkable of a film than Inception. I mean, like this is such a Nolan's voice movie. Like I don't know if he's ever made a movie that is so much like this is who I am. This is everything that I want to say.
I mean, it's this and The Prestige.
Yes, but The Prestige also has some goofiness in there. It has some plotty, narrative-y kind of character-y stuff that he usually disdains. This one is pure Nolan. I mean,
and he's adapting somebody else's work there. So you're right. This is the pure Nolan.
This is the dead wife to beat all dead wives is in this one. This is the ultimate of the dead wife. This is all his stuff. I mean, yeah, DiCaprio is playing him as far as I can tell.
Oh yeah,
but also
but there's like
blonde hair, the suit. It's him. Yeah.
There's like 4 people that dress like him and have his haircut in this movie. Like,
everyone.
Gordon Levitt's also him. Even Hardy is kind of slicked back for some reason. Well, yeah, I don't know. This might be his best movie. It's not my favorite of his, however. I guess is where I end up landing on it.
It's such a pure like expression of an artist, and I mean this is a surprise to me coming back how much his movies are about the struggle of artists, in the struggle of creation, in that Aronofsky Black Swan kind of way we were talking about a little while back. That's like a preoccupation of his, which is not something I had kind of in my head as a big Nolan thing. But no, it's like the number one thing. It's fastidiousness, yes. Timelines, yes. Dead wives, yes. All the the external stuff that I remember as being like clear Nolan things. They're all in service of this. The
Yeah,
struggle of being an artist.
it's weird because he doesn't fit the artist, like sensitive artist archetype.
No, not at
That
all.
as he conceptualizes the role of the screenwriter in the allegory here as an architect, and I think that's very telling. That
Yeah.
as an artist, he is an architect that
Oh,
is very
totally.
schematic about him.
And
Yeah.
I mean, and you can see that in all of his films. I think they're more, again, it's each one of his films seems to be what's the big idea as far as how am I going to play with time in this particular one, because that's obviously one of his uh, big.
Preoccupations.
Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. Um, so he's going to explore it here, with the dream within a dream, the time dilation that way. You have how it's explored in later movies, as Interstellar, Tenet, and so on, Dunkirk. And in that way, it's like, how am I going to architect the matter, the perception of time in this particular one? And I don't know that you could have, from a strictly design standpoint, I don't know if you could have done a better job than he does in this, because even though you do have the exposition dumps, it does clearly explain it, and then the movie demonstrates that. And as long as you're following along, even if you're confused a little bit, but from a high level, you can understand it and be fascinated with it. I found it fascinating, actually, just the idea of it, again, because I don't remember my dreams very well. Just the idea of how would this, if I were in this situation, how would I perceive things that are going on? If I were Cillian Murphy's character, how would I perceive these sort of things? And I don't know, I just find that really interesting for me. That draws me into this.
It is,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, I mean,
I'm drawn
it's
in.
just weird. I bump up on it because it's so much talk about dreams, and it's not really dreams for me. Like, this is not how dreams work for me. This is not really about dreaming whatsoever. It's about this other thing, and I
Well,
don't know. They just say the word dream so much that
if we're talking like dreams
keeps
as a
bringing it back to it.
metaphor for movies,
Yeah.
as a metaphor for the dream factory, Hollywood, as a metaphor for these sort of stories that have taken such cultural importance in the for the last 60 years or whatever. There are obviously the life's blood of Christopher Nolan and filmmakers like him that the creating these stories. If we change the definition of dream to that, then it's very
then
clear.
it all works.
Yeah, then
Yeah.
it's very clear what this movie's about.
Yes.
And that's why this the metaphor for filmmaking reading kind of just subsumed the film for me at that point. Like the most accurate critical analysis I feel I've heard. It just unlocks the movie in a way, but it also kind of
that's the level where it works the best, I think.
Oh yeah,
Well, I agree with you on that.
yeah. I do think it's interesting maybe to talk about the overall, is the whole thing a dream a little. I mean, this, again, it's what everyone talked about, and initially after this, like, is he asleep at the end? Is the whole thing a dream up to this point? I think no, if there is an answer, but the truth is that there's not supposed to be an answer. Yeah. Like, we're not really supposed to know one way or the other. The top is spinning. It wobbles a little. What's that mean? It means nothing. It means, you can never be 100% sure. So just live where you are. If I were to explicate it in a simple way.
I mean, I think it means that either way would be a
Mhm.
little less satisfying. So we'll split the difference, and
Right.
you can have it either way you want. I think
I think that
that sounded dismissive, but I think that's the best. That's the right way to do it.
I agree.
I think the idea that he incepted his wife and that's why she killed herself makes there is a reality, a base reality that he lives in, more appealing. Works a little more.
Yeah.
Michael Caine is on record saying all the scenes I'm in are real life, and he's not asleep at that point. That's what Nolan told me, and I believe him. So, who knows if he's right?
I prefer to think that. I mean, that yes, that is true. Except for maybe the last scene. I don't think you can have a definite conclusion on the last scene. I think it's constructed too deliberately ambiguous.
Right.
To that if. And I mean, that's the way I always kind of said that when there's something like that, is it real or is it not? And if they leave it ambiguous, like if there was a correct answer, then the filmmaker could have given it to you, and they chose to pose it as a question instead, which means that you can argue about it, but you can't actually win the argument ever. I don't find any extra value in everything being a dream. I prefer there to be as much reality as possible in my fake stories.
But to that one thing, and I wonder if you guys noticed this in your rewatch, when when suddenly they're awake on the airplane and they're about ready to land, the transition from the prior scene to that I found to be very abrupt, and I think that is what gives you the ambiguity of, all right, or is Cobb still dreaming at this point, or are we in reality? Because I think up until that point it's been clearly defined. Here's the kick, here's coming out of a dream state. But from that point on, when they wake up there, I don't think that there was a really, really clearly defined change in terms of whether or not they're out at all or not. And so from that point on, then you really have that, I don't know, is this legit or is it not? Again, like you, I prefer to think it's legit and he's awake. But
Well,
I just think it's kind of an interesting at that point, you know, especially, for that whole song, that whole musical experience there from Hans Zimmer. It's just really ambiguous.
well, I've heard three kind of ideas about what's going on that I find interesting, and all are equally compelling to me. First is that yes, when he's awake, he's awake. When he's actually working within the dream, that's dreams. But it is, as we said, and he incepted his wife, and that's why she didn't believe in reality anymore. The other one was the entire movie is a dream, that he is on another, just a higher level of dreaming, and keeps going lower and lower over the course of the film. And Mal was correct. Mal was right. He never woke up, and they're still in some version of he's still in some version of his own dream here, and that is the reality he chooses. And there's a lot of things about how the world works that suggest that, like in Mombasa, the that dream sequence looking scene where he's running through the streets and the walls start closing in on him. I think there's a great bit where he confronts Marion Cotillard in Limbo, where she's talking about, and you think it makes sense that you're being pursued by a enigmatic, shadowy corporation that has,
there are thugs that are chasing him through
Yeah.
Mombasa are very much like the subconscious projections in the movies. And
Yeah,
that they are sort of faceless, nameless people that just pull up in a car and start shooting at you.
Yeah, so just COBOL engineering. We don't really know what the hell that is. It could be just dream construct nonsense. And so in that reading, it's all a dream. And in the third reading is that yes, it's all the dream, but it is a real-time dream that an artist is having, that Christopher Nolan perhaps is having about his own process.
I thought you were going to say the other one is that
really irks.
is the theory that it's all an inception on Cobb himself, that like Michael Caine or whoever is organized to try and incept the idea into him that he can get over his guilt over the death of his wife.
That's not bad either. I mean, there's so much you can do with this. This all is invited by the film. Like, this invites you to figure stuff out, and try to find the what meaning is intended, even though pretty clearly I think none of them are quote unquote intended. This is all just so dreamlike, but then aren't all movies dreamlike in the end? Aren't they all kind of a dream version of reality in their own way? We're just used to a certain vocabulary on them. And this is where I think that it does kind of get into actual dreaming a little bit, in that it is subjective. And well, I guess in the way that they're like movies is the way that it's a dream.
Right.
That these experiences that we have with them will be our own ultimately. That's cool. That's kind of fun.
Well, the thing
that
where it fits into Nolan's filmography is
Yeah.
that our subjective truth is always going to be the thing that's going to overpower whatever the objective reality is. And that's where I think I'm actually simpatico with Nolan in some ways. Like a large part of our Nolan-oscopy here has been the ways that I have not been simpatico with a lot of his approach to storytelling and whatnot, but I think we have the same basic conception of reality, which is that there is absolutely an objective reality out there where things are true or they're not. However, I think human beings, we're sort of stuck with the fact that we can only observe that reality through these machines that are not these meat machines of our perceptions, that are not designed to render it accurately. They're designed to get us to act in a timely fashion. And so it takes shortcuts and it incepts ideas on us. And we're sort of in a prison of our own subjective realities, even though there is a real reality out there that Marion Cotillard is living in, apparently.
I do like that. That's a succinct way of saying what I was trying to get at. I think it is a singular film. It truly is. Like this film could not have been made by anybody else. I mean, I guess the basic premise could have, but it would never feel like this. If this came specifically from a really unique and specific artist who had just made a profoundly successul film. Like,
I can't imagine anybody else doing this premise and not having it be terrible.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I feel like you could do like Dream Heist pretty much. Like a lot of people could do Dream Heist and it would be kind of cool. You know, like,
I think there's so much. This is such a difficult concept to try and do it with actual stakes and everything. Like maybe there's a Terry Gilliam version of it that works in a completely different way.
Yeah, very different.
Entirely.
But.
Yeah, I think anybody else it would have come across much more like Dreamscape, which is an okay movie from the early '80s. Exploring the ideas of within '80s budgetary constraints and '80s special effects constraints, but it takes a certain kind of storyteller to be able to pull off number one this level. I mean, he wrote the script for Inception, so obviously he had to architect how it's going to be, how to construct it, from every viewpoint, and how many directors can you think of out there that I think are able to get that technical just in terms of story, the logistics of telling this kind of very, very complicated story. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
that's why I'm not sure that I want more whimsy in this, or that it would work with more whimsy in this, even though I say that as a weakness. It's
Nolan's
maybe
whimsy.
like maybe you need to have these rules be nailed down as hard and fast as possible in order for there to be any sense of stakes in this nesting doll of dream worlds that we're bouncing through.
Right.
Well, I mean, I can imagine like a horror movie version of this. I can, imagine a pure fantasy version of this. Like, I mean, if I were going to say, like, if I wanted to take this premise and give it to somebody else, it would be a fantasist. It would be somebody like Gilliam or somebody who's, all about the visuals, Guillermo del Toro or somebody, along those lines, who's all about like dreams in a different way, who is really more engaged with actual dreams than as metaphor for storytelling. And I feel like that could work, but it would be so different. It would be basically a Dreamscape remake rather than an Inception remake.
Yeah,
Inception.
It is interesting that it feels like a really bad match of material and artist in that sense. That Nolan does not seem like he's plugged into the Dreamscape, or that he's such a grounded.
Yeah, I think his dreams probably do look like this. Like the weirdest it gets is it's like, oh, it's raining inside, but otherwise it is a very elegantly put together boardroom that we are in with, some Chinese water hanging lanterns things, like that feels very Nolan to me. It's so personal. This movie is such a Nolan film, the most Nolan film. And I don't know.
It is so personal, and yet it still comes across to me as primarily a thought exercise. That it is an intellectual exercise, which I think is telling us the type of, android that Christopher Nolan is to an extent. And it's ironic that it is an intellectual exercise that pays explicit lip service to the idea that we need an emotional grounding for this intellectual exercise to function. And it's still, and it does that, but doesn't quite like get there for me. It's just, it's a great intellectual exercise, though. I think its thoughts are all right or correct.
I went 4 stars out of 5 on Letterboxd when I watched this. I was like, yeah, this is really good. Clearly, it's a film that, it's probably not going to be. I mean, I know for a fact now it's not a film I'm going to rewatch over and over again. I think it was the third time I'd seen it. But it's so impressive and singular. And some movies are like that. Some movies, you just don't need to see too many times to really get something out of them. And yeah, I do feel like it's all there if I want to go in and really get granular about how this works and the themes being expressed. Again, with Nolan, though, I feel like he doesn't need you to do that. Like you don't really need to understand everything to get the effect he's after.
Right.
And, this may be more so than most of his other films. I do feel that this one kind of sets him on a bad path a little bit. I think that the fact that
Well,
this came
we'll
out
get into that as we go. We're going to continue going forward.
Yes. This was a
We'll do
profound
The Dark
hit.
Knight Rises next. Yeah.
This thing was gigantically successful. And how is that possible watching this movie? How was this such a huge hit? It's such a arm's length kind of difficult film, and people went with it. Everyone went on this journey with him. They were just like, yes, fuck yes, this is great. We love this movie. And huge hit of the year, and this, of course, allows him to do anything he wants going forward.
Yeah, he can write his own ticket.
We may have turned the corner on that with Tenet. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Bit of a fiasco, really, there financially, at least. But
you know what I think that is? I think it's the power of Batman.
Yeah,
the Batman got audiences on board with whatever Nolan wanted to do next, and they were willing to go this far, even to something as strange and difficult as Inception can be. And now when we get to Tenet, we're a lot farther away from his last Batman movie, and people have lost it. In a weird, Batman is almost the emotional tether that with audiences that allowed him to take them on this more conceptual leap with Inception, I think.
Yeah, well, that's how you do it, right? I mean, that's exactly what you want to do when you hit something out of the park like that. All right, I did my big studio movie. Now I'm going to do the real shit. This is the big crazy movie that I really want to make, and I'm going to do it up right. And it's the total. It's
the platonic ideal of the one for them, one for me thing, that you bring them with you to the one for me. Like it worked. I think that and a lot of it, I really do think a lot of that's the audience was still invested in Nolan and wanting, because his Batman series was still an ongoing endeavor there, and they wanted that to continue to work out as well as it did the last time.
And
so I think people
to its credit,
went into it more open than they would have.
To its credit, I think the marketing people did a phenomenal job on Inception. The trailers, when you saw the folding city in the trailer, you're like, okay, I want to see that movie. I remember seeing the trailers for it and going, I don't know what I'm watching, but that looks really cool. And then, as more and more word got out about it, they were releasing footage of Joseph Gordon-Levitt in the hallway scene where he's flipping around. It's like, okay, visually anyway, this looks like a must-see in a movie theater. And I know for me personally, I saw it opening weekend.
I believe that,
and I really really liked it. I mean, it was a hit. My wife got kind of lost in it. She got it from the broad strokes. She understood it well enough to enjoy it, but she was like, "Yeah, I don't ever need to see that again." But I mean, she appreciated the visuals.
Yeah, and that hallway fight's probably also a big factor in it too. Is that as difficult as this movie can be to describe and talk about, like some of the more conceptual aspects of it, you could always sort of default to, well, look, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, but you got to see this hallway zero gravity fight thing. Like that made it easier for word of mouth to go around.
It's a good ass fight. It might be the best one of his career. It's a hell of a scene. And I guess it's sort of a dilated scene, although it happens over the course of a half hour of the movie, just in cuts. But it's striking and great. And I mean, it's maybe the best version of that I've seen,
Right.
I mean, it's a very specific thing. This is sort of his version of the Matrix, this movie. And it is kind of a Matrix. It reminds me of the Matrix fight scenes, like the really good ones in those. I don't think he's matched it in his career, honestly. I don't think
I wouldn't say so.
Yeah, sequence has been that sort of viscerally exciting.
What do you think the impact of Hans Zimmer's score has on the film in terms of enjoyment? I think it's one of Zimmer's best efforts, with a lot of phenomenal pieces that really stand out. Time, obviously, at the end really stands out. Yeah. The dream is collapsing is another very, very strong effort. The Mombasa sequence in general. And I think, especially at the end, with the usage of the time piece of music, really helps carry, I think, sending you off. I mean, beyond the fact that you have the spinning top, I think that music helps drive everything into a really nice, you leave the theater kind of, wow, that was really something kind of feeling.
Yeah, I think it's hard to actually overstate how important score is to making this stuff land. I mean, not just with Nolan movies, but you're right, with this one especially. The time track, that's just titled Time, is an incredible track and lends a lot to it. We can play us out over it.
Yeah, I'd say it's playing right now. Mm-hmm. Great stuff. Great film to talk about. I was worried about this one. I feel like I got some insight into it now. But that was it's just such a mouthful of a film. There's so much here, and yeah, thank you very much.
I was worried too. It turns out it's a little more fun to talk about than it is to watch. That's what I learned.
Thanks for joining us, Matt. I think we'll have you back in the near future. And, the Nolan-oscopy marches on. Finishing out the Dark Knight trilogy next. This has been a blast, and we will talk to you about Batman once again next time.
Thanks for having me, guys.